There are men who are born into rooms that other men will never enter. Min-ho Kang was one of those men. He didn't just walk into rooms, he arrived in them. There's a difference. Arriving means the room rearranges itself around you, means heads turn before you've said a word, means the silence that follows your footsteps is a kind of applause. He stood at the head of V-Nex's boardroom, 47 floors up, soles spread below like a circuit board lit at dusk, in a suit that cost more than most people's rent for a year, and the room breathed around him the way rooms breathed around men who had never been told no. V-Nex Technology, 47 floors, 11,000 employees across 6 countries, a cloud infrastructure empire worth $50 billion, built by a man who had reportedly eaten the same breakfast for 30 years. Kang Jae-won had started it in a single server room in Mapogu in 1988. He had one heir, Min-ho. The board members called him the Crown Prince, not to his face, never to his face, but in elevators, in parking garages, over hushed lunches expensed to company accounts. Crown Prince, not in the way you'd say it with warmth. Mr. Kang, a junior analyst, maybe 25, voice barely holding, cleared his throat from the far end of the table. The Pyongyang data corridor projections show a... Stop. Min-ho didn't look up from the paper in front of him. Which university? A beat. Sir? Your university. Which one? Yonsei, business, class of... And they taught you to lead a quarterly projection with a subordinate clause? Min-ho finally looked up. The eye contact alone made the analyst's mouth go dry. If your data can't speak for itself in the first sentence, your data isn't ready. Neither are you. Sit down. The room exhaled. No one spoke. No one defended the analyst. Min-ho returned to his papers like the moment never happened. And in the corridor beyond the glass, if anyone had been watching, they might have noticed the older man standing very still, Kang Jae-won, spine straight, hands clasped behind his back, knuckles pale, watching his son through the boardroom window, with an expression that was not pride and was not shame and was not quite either of those things. Something older. Something that had already made up its mind. There is a particular cruelty in being unmade by someone who made you. Jaewon's office that evening. The city had gone from gold to gray outside the window. He sat with his hands on his knees, spine straight, like a man who had already made a decision and was simply informing the universe. He did not offer Min-ho a seat. Min-ho didn't take one. He never sat first. I've been watching you for 3 years. His father's voice carried the particular flatness of a man who had long ago stopped wasting emotion on people who disappointed him. Not as your father, as the owner of this company. There's a difference? There is now. The pause that followed landed like a stone in still water. The board has reviewed the succession assessment, the Osaka expansion, the margin collapse, the personnel decisions, the vendor contracts you canceled without consultation, 11 million USD in recoverable losses. Jaewon opened a folder. He didn't look at it. He already knew every number. Your management style is not leadership, Min-ho. It is fear. You have built a culture of silence, and silence is where companies go to die. Min-ho's jaw tightened. Something moved behind his eyes. Not shame, not quite, but the animal instinct that fires just before a cage closes. I can fix... I'm not asking you to fix it. His father stood. I am telling you that the name Kang does not belong to a man who has not yet earned it. You have been given every advantage this company could offer. What you have done with it is... He paused, pressed his lips together. Insufficient. Min-ho's hands curled at his sides, slowly, the way ice cracks, quietly and then all at once. What does that mean? What are you... You will leave this office tonight. You will not come back to this building until I say you may. Jaewon placed a key card on the table between them. A single key, worn, plastic, a number printed on it. Room 4B. There is a Goshiwon in Mapogu, $200 a month. That is where you will live, as Kang Min-ho, not the son, not the heir, as a man.
You will
You
learn
will
what it
learn
means
what
to
it
have
means to
nothing.
have nothing.
And when you
And
have
when you
learned
have
that,
learned
if
that,
you learn that,
if you
we
learn
will
that,
speak
we
again
will
about
speak again
inheritance.
about
You will
inheritance.
learn what it means to
The
have nothing.
silence that followed was geological, the kind of silence that rearranges what came before it. Minho picked up the keycard. He turned and walked out without a word, and in the reflection of the glass door, if you had been watching, you would have seen his father sit back down slowly, heavily, like a man who had just done the hardest thing of his life and was not certain he had done the right one. Minho had never taken the subway before. He got on the wrong train twice. The Goshiwan smelled like instant ramen and floor cleaner, and something older underneath both, the compressed smell of many lives lived in very little space. Fluorescent lights ran the length of the narrow corridor, one of them flickering with the patient irregularity of something that had been broken for a long time and had given up expecting to be fixed. The rooms lined both sides, numbered doors so close together that a man with his arms outstretched could touch both walls at once. Room 4B was 6 feet by 9 feet, a cot, a desk barely large enough for a laptop, a single shelf, a window the size of a shoebox that looked directly into the concrete wall of the adjacent building. Minho stood in the doorway for a long moment. He had a penthouse in Gangnam, radiant floor heating, a refrigerator with a touchscreen. He stepped inside, sat on the edge of the cot. The mattress exhaled a sound of ancient defeat. For the first time in 34 years, there was no one to call, no assistant to solve the problem, no company card, no name to open doors, just a man, a mattress, and a window that showed him exactly 3 inches of soul sky. He didn't sleep that night. What he did, around 2 a.m., staring at the ceiling, was notice the sound from next door. Not music, not voices, something else. Underneath the ambient hiss of the building, almost imperceptible, the rhythmic, rapid percussion of fingers on a keyboard. Fast, precise, like rain, but deliberate, like someone typing who never needed to stop and think. It came from the room marked 4C. Minho pressed his ear against the wall, just for a moment, before he caught himself and straightened, disgusted by the impulse. He lay back down. The typing continued, unhurried, endless, patient as a heartbeat. He saw his neighbor for the first time the next morning in the shared kitchenette. Gray early light, a tall man standing at the counter, Nigerian, maybe late 20s, with the lean, quiet stillness of someone who had long since made peace with being overlooked. He was stirring ramen with a plastic fork, not in a hurry, not performing anything for anyone. There was something about his eyes. Calm, yes, but not the calm of absence, the calm of containment, like a lake that goes deeper than it looks. "Morning," the man said, not looking up. Minho said nothing. He reached past him for the water kettle, and their eyes met briefly. Minho looked away first. He was not sure why. His name was Solomon, room 4C, Nigerian student, according to the building's sign-in sheet. No visitors, no noise, just the ramen and the closed door and the typing that started every night at midnight and went until the sky turned gray. Minho didn't think about him much after that. He had other problems. He didn't know yet that Solomon was the solution to all of them. The headline arrived at 3:47 a.m., not one notification, but dozens, arriving simultaneously, a cascade of red banners flooding the phone screen and carving harsh blue-white light across Minho's face as he jolted upright from a half-sleep he hadn't known he'd fallen into. He called his father's direct line, a recording, the company's emergency protocol. He called his father's assistant, the woman who had worked for Jae-won for 17 years. "Minho," her voice was broken glass. "Don't come here. The police are already. They're asking about..." A sound in the background, a voice giving instructions. Don't come here. He was already putting on his jacket. He learned 3 things in the next 90 minutes. The first, his father had been found at his desk at V-Nex Tower, dead from cardiac arrest. The second, the cause was not natural, an AI-engineered cyber attack, a logic bomb, buried inside the company's cloud infrastructure for months, had activated at 11 p.m. It had not just crashed the system, it had locked it. Every server, every data cluster, every transaction record and operational backbone of V-Nex technology, $50 billion worth of digital architecture, sealed behind a single countdown timer running cold and patient on every screen in the building. 71 hours. The third thing, the police were looking for him. They met him in the lobby of V-Nex Tower, his father's building. His building, now lit like a crime scene because it was one. Detective Yoon wore the particular expression of a man who has already decided something and is gathering evidence to confirm what he's decided. Mr. Kang, we understand there was a disagreement with your father, a formal disinheritance. It wasn't public. 7 board members knew, 3 assistants, a lawyer. A thin smile. It was public. He held up a plastic evidence bag. Inside, a visitor log. Min Ho's name. V-Nex Tower. 9 p.m. the previous evening. You were in the building. Min Ho's throat went tight. I went to try to speak with him. His assistant said he wasn't available. I left. The cameras show you leaving at 9:42 p.m. Yoon tilted his head. The motion was practiced, precise. Your father's time of death was estimated between 10 and 11 p.m., a pause that lasted exactly long enough to be cruel. So close. They took him in for questioning at 5:30 a.m. They released him at noon, not because they believed him, because they couldn't hold him without evidence, not yet. He stood on the steps of the station. The city moved around him. Delivery bikes, office workers, someone laughing into a phone. The ordinary persistence of life, completely indifferent to the fact that his had just shattered. His hands were shaking. Not violently, but persistently, like a current running through them that he couldn't switch off. His father was dead. He allowed himself exactly 4 seconds to feel the full weight of it. The man who had built everything he'd ever stood on, gone, and the last thing between them, a conversation that never finished. 4 seconds. Then he closed his hands into fists and straightened his spine. There was a timer. 68 hours now. When it hit 0, every contract, every server lease, every financial transaction would be frozen or lost. The company would go bankrupt before the lawyers could file the paperwork. Whoever had built the logic bomb had not just killed his father. They'd built a second weapon, time-delayed, aimed at everything his father had ever made. And Minho was locked out of the company, the systems, the building, trapped in a 6x9 room in Mapogu with a cheap laptop, a dying phone, and $48 in his account, because his father, meticulous to the last, had suspended all access on the night of the disinheritance. He walked back to the Goshiwan. He had nowhere else to go. In the first 24 hours, V-Nex's internal security team tried everything they knew. In a second 24, they brought in outside firms. By hour 40, 5 of the world's most respected cybersecurity agencies had examined the logic bomb. None of them could crack it. Minho sat in room 4B for the 3rd Zoom call in 12 hours, the cheap laptop balanced on his knees, the screen filled with the stacked faces of V-Nex's interim emergency board. Ties loosened, eyes hollow. CyberArk says the encryption layer is something they've never seen. They're calling it a 3rd-generation polymorphic lock. It doesn't just encrypt, it learns attempts to open it and changes the encryption in response. He stopped, composed himself. It's designed to be unbreakable. Nothing is unbreakable, Minho said. His voice came out flatter than he intended. Minho, the CFO looked directly at the camera. The team from Tel Aviv, they've never failed. 16 years. They looked at this for 18 hours and sent back a refund. A pause that landed like a hammer. A refund. 31 hours on the timer. He closed the laptop, sat in the dark. Then he opened it again and started typing. Logic bomb counter exploit, third-generation polymorphic encryption, dark web security specialists, and got nothing useful and then too many things that were useless and slammed the laptop shut. The walls of room 4B pressed in, 6 feet, 9 feet, the ceiling low enough to make breathing feel like an act of negotiation. Through the thin partition from 4C, barely audible, the typing, still going, unhurried as always, patient as a heartbeat. Minho stared at the wall. Something shifted behind his eyes. Not an idea, not yet, just a question, forming in the dark. Who types at midnight like that? Who lives in a room this small and never leaves it, and smells of cheap ramen and doesn't speak to anyone, and has been here 11 months? He got up, crossed to the wall, raised his hand to knock. Then he stopped himself, put his hand down, walked back to the cot and lay there for 2 hours with his eyes open, while the typing on the other side of the wall continued without interruption. At 3 a.m., 28 hours left on the timer, he got up again, and this time he knocked. The door of 4C opened 4 inches. Solomon looked at him. He didn't seem surprised. He didn't seem anything, really, just present, in the way a person is present when they have no particular reason to hide. I stopped. He hadn't planned what to say. He'd been sure he would plan on the way there. I need help with something technical. Solomon said nothing, just watched him. I don't even know if you're... Minho pressed his palm against the doorframe, steadying himself. I can pay you. When this is over, I can pay you significantly. My family's company is... There's a cybersecurity situation, and the best firms in the world have tried to... The VNX logic bomb. The stillness that followed was absolute. Minho's expression shattered and rebuilt itself in under a second. How do you know about that? Solomon opened the door wider. The room inside did not match the room around it. 3 screens, stacked on a desk and wall-mounted brackets, ran feeds that bled dark green code and network diagrams and signal architectures that Minho didn't have the vocabulary to name. Cables ran in tight, organized lines across the floor, up the wall, disappearing behind the ventilation panel. In the corner, like a piece of carefully preserved evidence, a single dirty Ethernet cable sat coiled on top of a hard drive enclosure. And on the central screen, half minimized, as though Solomon had been looking at it before Minho knocked, the VNX countdown timer. Minho's throat closed. "You've been watching it," he said, the words come out barely above nothing. "I've been studying it." Solomon moved back to his chair, unhurried. "Sit down if you want. There's no other chair. You can take the floor." Minho didn't sit. "Who are you?" Solomon picked up the old Ethernet cable, turned it over in his hands once, the gesture of a man who finds comfort in a familiar tool. In Lagos, there was a bank, regional, 47 branches. They were processing loans at inflated rates for communities in flood zones, then selling the debt to international hedge funds before the claims hit. 12,000 families. He set the cable down. "I was 23. I'd been in digital security since I was 15. Nobody wanted to listen, so I made them listen. You dismantled a bank's digital infrastructure. I didn't steal anything. I didn't take money. I made the truth unavoidable. And then you ran." "And then I ran." No drama in it, just fact. Minho looked at the screens, looked at Solomon, looked at the timer. 28 hours. They call you something, don't they, in certain communities online? There's a name. Solomon's expression didn't change. Some people say the Weaver. I've never called myself anything. "Can you break the logic bomb?" The longest pause of the night. Solomon looked at the screen, the numbers running cold and steady. "The company that built it, Novasys AI, based out of Hong Kong. I know who built it because I recognize the architecture. I've seen one component of this before. The rest is..." He exhaled slowly through his nose. "New. It's the most sophisticated thing I've ever seen." That's not an answer. No. Solomon picked up the Ethernet table again. He stood. "Sit on the floor if you want. This is going to take everything that's left of the night." He plugged the cable into the back of Minho's cheap laptop. The screens flickered. New windows opened. Cascades of code, green on black, like rain falling up. Minho sat on the floor. He watched a man he had dismissed as nobody, a quiet foreign student who smelled of cheap ramen and never left his room, begin to do something that the world's best security firms had declared impossible. And he felt something he hadn't felt since he was 9 years old, standing at the edge of his father's server room, watching the machines blink and hum. He felt small, genuinely, purely small, not diminished, not humiliated, small the way you feel small looking at the ocean. Small because you are standing next to something enormous. He had spent his entire life arranging rooms so he would never feel this. He had not understood that this feeling was not weakness. Solomon did not explain what he was doing in real time. Minho asked twice. Solomon didn't answer. Not rudely, simply the way you don't acknowledge a sound that doesn't require a response. After the second time, Minho stopped asking. The city outside the small window moved through its hours, from the gray of pre-dawn to the gold of early morning to the flat white of midday. Solomon's hands never stopped. Minho slept for 2 hours against the wall, woke with his neck aching, and resumed his position on the floor. At one point, his phone rang, his lawyer, then a news alert. V-Nex heir named prime suspect in founder's death. Above a photo of him outside the police station, jaw tight, eyes hollow, framed to look exactly like what they wanted him to look like. He turned the phone face down. 16 hours left on the timer. They built this in layers, Solomon said, suddenly, without looking up. It was the first thing he'd said in 4 hours. His voice was even, unhurried. The bomb itself is the third layer. Below it is an authentication firewall that regenerates every 90 seconds. Below that is a ghost process, a decoy system that looks like the master control but isn't. Every firm that's tried to break in has been interacting with the ghost, not the real system. How do you know which is real? Because the ghost is perfect, Solomon glanced at him sideways. Nothing real is perfect. Real systems have inefficiencies, latency gaps. The ghost breathes too evenly. He turned back to the screen. The real system breathes wrong. That's how you find it. Silence. Minho stared at the waterfall of code, characters he couldn't read, cascading without pause. Who does this? Who builds something like this? His voice came out smaller than he intended. Novices, they're a competitor, but this is a weapon, Solomon said, simply, and the person who built it was angry, not strategic, angry. There's a difference. Strategy builds what it needs. Anger builds more than it needs because it wants to be certain. He highlighted a section of code. Look here, this kill switch is redundant, then this one, then this one. 3 kill switches, all wired to the same trigger. A strategic programmer uses one, an angry one doesn't trust themselves. He paused. That's also how you beat it. Why? Because if you're angry, you repeat yourself, and repetition is pattern, and pattern is a door. At 6:14 a.m., something changed. Minho felt it before he saw it. The quality of Solomon's silence shifted from the silence of concentration to the silence of something found, like the moment a lock clicks open, like a held breath finally released. There, Solomon said, quietly, not triumphant, just accurate. The countdown timer, 12 minutes left, blinked, paused, blinked again. New text filled the screen. Authentication loop detected. Reversing. The code ran differently now. It wasn't breaking through the wall anymore. It was going around it, underneath it, like water finding the place where the foundation wasn't sealed. You're in? Minho was on his feet without remembering standing. In the real system, yes, Solomon said. His hands hadn't stopped. The bomb's still counting. Can you disarm it? I could. He typed something, a pause that lasted exactly long enough. I'm not going to. Minho went very still. Solomon's face in the screen glow was complex, Not malicious, not uncertain, something older than both of those. The people who built this, they're still in your system right now, watching the countdown, waiting for the timer to zero out. He pulled up a secondary window. Network traffic, red nodes clustered and still. These are their back doors, the tunnels they built while laying the bomb, so they could watch it go off. They haven't left because they want to see it. They want to know it worked. So, destroy the bomb, end it. We still have... Or, Solomon paused, his hands paused for just a moment. I follow their tunnels back. The weight of what he was saying settled in the room like a weather change. You can't. That's illegal. That's a... Minho. Solomon turned to look at him fully for the first time in hours. And there it was, the thing behind the calm. Not coldness, precision, the focused stillness of a man who has done hard things before and made peace with his hands. They killed your father. They built a weapon, buried it in the heart of what he made, lit the fuse, and they are sitting in a room right now watching the seconds count down. When it hits zero, they'll delete the tunnels, clean their hands, and the trail will vanish. I can follow the trail right now, or we disarm the bomb, and they walk away clean. 8 minutes on the timer. Minho walked to the window, the small window, the 3 inches of Seoul sky. He stood there for a long moment. Outside, the city was waking up. Buses, voices, the low percussion of ordinary life, indifferent and continuous, as it had always been and would be long after every room in this building was emptied and refilled with different lives. His father had built V-necks from a single server room in 1988. He had eaten the same breakfast for 30 years. He had been meticulous and careful and stubborn, and sometimes cruel in the way people are cruel when they love something so much they can't soften around it. He had stripped his son of his name and sent him to a room the size of a coffin, and it was the most honest thing he had ever done for him. Minho's hands opened, uncurled. Something released in his chest. Not grief, not anger, something that encompassed both and went beyond them. He turned around. Don't destroy anything, he said. Don't hurt anyone, but take control. Take their servers, everything they have. His voice was steady now, carrying something it hadn't carried before. Not command, but intention. The evidence of what they did, I want it preserved. Every line, every trace, every communication. He met Solomon's eyes. Give me the keys. Solomon held his gaze for 1 breath, 2. Then he turned back to the screen and his hands moved, fast, fluid, purposeful, and the code changed again, no longer flowing, reaching, extending, tendrils of command threading back through Novasis's own tunnels, following the path they'd cut, arriving uninvited and undetected at the other end. The V-necks countdown stopped with 4 minutes and 11 seconds remaining. 4 new windows opened on Solomon's screens. Novasys servers, communications, transaction records, planning documents that would, by morning, find their way to 3 separate law enforcement agencies and 1 investigative journalist who had been covering corporate AI crime for 6 years. In a conference room in a Hong Kong high-rise, a group of executives sat watching their own countdown, watching it reach 0, waiting for the confirmation of ruin. And then all their screens went blank, simultaneously, and a cursor appeared, blinking, patient, and a single line of text. You have been seen. The screens went quiet. Solomon leaned back in his chair, not dramatically, just the small release of a man who has finished a long and careful task. He rolled his neck once. Then he reached down and unplugged the Ethernet cable from Minho's cheap laptop with the same unhurried gesture he used for everything. Minho was sitting on the floor again. He didn't remember sitting down. It's done, he said. It's done. Minho pressed his hand flat against the floor, felt the solidity of it, the cold and real plainness of cheap linoleum in a room the size of a coffin. The evidence. Transmitted, encrypted, time-stamped, 3 recipients, indelible. Solomon set the cable on the desk, picked up his ramen, still there, long gone cold, and stirred it once, apparently unbothered.
Novices will know someone was in their system within the hour. By then, it won't matter. Minho looked up at him. Why? The word came out simple, unguarded, in a way Minho hadn't been in longer than he could precisely remember. Your father built something, brick by brick, server by server. It didn't deserve to die for someone's anger. That's reason one. He paused. Reason two? The people who did this, they thought they were untouchable. I have a problem with people who think they're untouchable. It's a personal flaw. A silence, but a different kind than the ones before, something breathable in it. I'm going to rebuild the company, Minho said slowly, like he was hearing the words as he said them. When this is over, the investigation, the legal process, I'm going to rebuild it. And I don't know what to offer you. Name a number. I don't want money. Minho blinked. Then what? Solomon looked at the screens, at the last traces of code still scrolling, the final threads of what he'd done dissolving into the ordinary noise of the network. He was quiet long enough that Minho thought he might not answer.
When I was in Lagos, Solomon said at last, my grandmother had a saying. She used it when someone would try to destroy something too big to destroy by force. He set down the ramen, looked at Minho directly with the full, unhurried weight of his attention. She said, in my country, we do not kill the lion. We make the lion our pet. Minho was very still. The people at Novices tried to kill V-Nex. They should have made it theirs, used it, turned it. Instead, they destroyed, and now they are destroyed in return. Solomon's voice was even, reflective, the voice of someone stating a principle they have lived by long enough that it no longer needs defending. You had everything, then you had nothing. If you go back and rebuild with the same hands that tore things down, then your father was right to send you here. But if you go back different, he tilted his head slightly. That is an interesting company. That is something worth being part of. Minho's throat tightened. He looked down at his hands, the hands he'd clenched in the boardroom, the hands that had shaken outside the police station. He opened them, let them lie flat on his knees, palms up, like a man with nothing left to prove. What do you want? To be part of it. What does that look like for you? Solomon picked up his ramen, considered. A room that is larger than this one, he said, and a real Ethernet cable. And Minho laughed, actually laughed, not the controlled social performance of laughter from a man who uses it as currency, but something that came from lower down, raw and surprised and real. The laugh of a man who has not laughed in a very long time and finds unexpectedly that he still remembers how. The screens dimmed. The Goshiwan corridor lay quiet in the dawn, peeling walls, flickering light, the specific and total indifference of a place that has housed too many lives to be impressed by any one of them. Weeks later, Minho stood at a podium, no suit, business casual, something you could sit on a floor in. When reporters asked what had changed in his vision for V-Nex, he said everything, and meant it in a way he couldn't have explained before 41 days in a room the size of a coffin. The Novices executives sat in a courtroom with their hands folded and their faces still. The evidence against them was everywhere and indelible, the way the truth is when someone has taken the time to make it unavoidable. And Solomon packed his room in 4C quietly, methodically, the way he did everything. The screens came down from the walls. The cables coiled themselves into neat loops. Last of all, he picked up the old Ethernet cable, the dirty, used one that had done the impossible, and placed it on top of everything else, like you keep a thing that proved you were right. He paused in the doorway, looked back at the room, at its dimensions, its smallness, its complete indifference to who had lived in it or what they had done there. He nodded once, closed the door. The corridor was quiet. The light still flickered. The numbered doors stood closed along both walls, holding their various silences. And if you had stayed, if you had stood very still in that narrow hallway and listened like you have to listen for things that don't announce themselves, you would have heard it. Somewhere from behind a closed door, the sound of someone typing, unhurried,
patient, like rain but deliberate, like someone who already knows what they're going to do next. There are men who are born into rooms that other men will never enter, and then there are rooms, small, fluorescent, smelling of ramen and floor cleaner and the accumulated weight of many quiet lives, where two men, with nothing in common but a shared wall and a shared enemy, built something that neither could have built alone. The crown prince lost his name in a goshiwan in Mapogu. What he found there was harder to name and worth considerably more. Follow for more intriguing stories.